the fateful morning of November 2nd, 2032, humanity's only home was thrown into a nuclear inferno by the greedy, the selfish, and the vengeful. The world descended into a long winter, the sands of time blowing away humanity's progress like the changing dunes of the West. As time went on, the snow turned into dust, and the dust into sand. A new era began to rise over the tattered world, marked by dust storms and seemingly endless deserts emerging from the open air. Nuclear summer. The survivors of the great nuclear holocaust began to leave their protective shells, deeming this time to be the dawn of mankind's road to recovery. In a particular place, in the outskirts of the once powerful Las Vegas, another tale of joy, grief, and violence was written into the mesa stones. Weary travelers have come to refer to this place as Lake Mead, a mirage in the desert, but also a place many have once called home.
The United States Civilization Preservation Force considered the Western USPF initiative a colossal failure, following their complete withdrawal from the American Southwest, starting with Lake Mead. When the order came to withdraw, USPF bases were hurriedly abandoned across the West. Gear that could not be salvaged was to be destroyed in order to prevent it from falling in enemy hands. Despite their best efforts, caches of weapons, gear, and vehicles were soon recovered and claimed by groups such as the SLF, groups of raiders, and in some cases, even the CDF, who could not resist the free gear. The equipment left behind by the USPF in their swift retreat funded many wars to come, further deteriorating the situation in Las Vegas and creating a massive power grapple for control over the city. Units, such as the 17th Sustainment Brigade, who notably fought in Las Vegas and Lake Mead, were soon reactivated in the Midwest. Other units had gone radio silent after the destruction of Nellis. When the call for reactivation came, many veterans of the Lake Mead ground war deserted in favor of locating their families, while others continued their journey as USPF servicemen in a different setting. Veterans from the Western USPF were plagued with an array of mental health conditions after the war's sudden conclusion, with many suffering from post-traumatic stress and anxiety disorders. Knowing the court-martial that awaited him in the East for armed insurrection and high treason, Colonel Hoppus decided he would not evacuate from Lake Mead, amongst the rest of his unit. During the USPF's evacuation from the valley, Hoppus engaged the Rad-8 in close-quarters combat whilst in his SEAL suit, killing both of them after detonating a bomb. As a result of his own actions, the USPF commander would not live out the rest of his days rotting away in a federal prison for inciting an armed insurrection against the very government he was serving. After initially failing to secure a foothold in the American Southwest, a second attempt was made at westward expansion amidst the Reconstruction era, as the turmoil continued to ravage the West. The USPF sought to take back what was lost in the American Southwest, but as the battle swept through the western states, this proved to be a hard, if not an impossible task to complete. Federal forces sent into the West struggled against the hardened paramilitary fighters who had occupied these lands for many decades, forcing the USPF into an asymmetric conflict that would soon be lost. Amassing losses and facing heavy resistance from desperate factions operating in the Southwest, the USPF were forced to cut their losses for a second time in 2096, when a new threat emerged in the East. The war in the East resulted in cities such as Los Angeles solidifying themselves as criminal capitals, with outlaws, paramilitary groups, and merciless raiders occupying them once and for all. Even today, more than a century and a half after the Flash, these cities have proven impossible to tame.
The Southwest Libertarian Front began its unparalleled expansion into the largely untamed Southwest, soon after the Western USPF's collapse, declaring the American Southwest an enclave. With Lake Mead falling under their banner, the SLF soon designated the region a low-priority area and began pulling out of Fort Verdian in droves, leaving behind only a skeleton crew to defend the fort. During the SLF's largely uncontested expansion into the rest of the American Southwest, many wastelanders were left with a sour taste in their mouths as the Libertarians marched down their streets. Capitalizing on the market and subjugating local settlements to trade pressure, many scrap towns fell under the SLF's banner and control soon after the faction's short-felt victory in the Lake Mead region. Few settlements welcomed the SLF with open arms, sharing similar anti-government sentiments with them. Their economy was more often than not bolstered, but many still felt they were being used. Towards the end of the Dust Bowl era, the SLF had made massive territorial strides across Arizona, California, Baja California, and Nevada, constructing merchant towns along major supply lines. Although short-lived and unrecognized by the USA, the Western Enclave spanned from Arizona to Baja California at its peak, with some city-states continuing to fly their banners even into the 2100s. Losing support from his subordinates after the conclusion of the ground war in Lake Mead, many LSF soldiers were left disillusioned with General Morey's extremism that had led to Nellis being nuked. Their concerns were met with divine intervention in 2067, when the general lost his life to malignant throat cancer. This created a power vacuum in the SLF that would go on to cause massive eternal strife. Eternal conflict peaked in the following decade, when the SLF split into 4 competing paramilitaries, all of whom controlled a piece of what had once been a unified territory across the Western Enclave. Going into the 90s, the SLF was all but a namesake for the paramilitary groups that had sprung up in their place. With their numbers declining, these groups kept exerting their control over their fading territories. By then, the SLF was a distant memory for the descendant paramilitaries, in their stead to the point of brothers fighting brothers. One group even mended relationships with the CDF based out of Phoenix. At the end of the USPF's second failed westward expansion in '96, SLF descendant paramilitaries had been all but thwarted, with rare pockets of remnants occupying territory across numerous state lines.
The CDF had taken the biggest hit in the ground war against the SLF. Over a 3-year period, they had lost more territory than was initially gained during the Dust Bowl era. Smaller cities and scrap towns were effectively abandoned in favor of reinforcing mega-settlements like Reno and Sacramento, while the rest of the Southwest fell to the SLF and other paramilitaries. Dozens of militants from the Lake Mead contingent found themselves retreating to Reno, linking up with their brothers in arms there. Others decided they had endured enough and left the militia altogether. Following the siege of Cliffguard, the destruction of the Lake Mead contingent, many sought to avenge those who had died fighting the SLF. A breakaway CDF militia formed as a response to this. Known as the Broken Contingent, this ruthless splinter militia attacked SLF patrols and conducted ambushes on their supply lines, more often than not being successful in taking home the spoils. They met the SLF with fierce resistance in Arizona, though this was not sustainable. In the 2060s, the militia disbanded as its influence started to fade, left powerless in drumming up support for their cause. The CDF were rapidly losing territory in the southwest, from the deep wastes of the Sonoran Desert to Lake Mead. Every contingent in between was failing to sustain itself due to cut-off supply lines. This trend continued for a couple of years after the Lake Mead Ground War had been officially declared over. with a deal being made to allow for the CDF to run supply caravans through SLF territory. Despite their near hostile tensions, the CDF were allowed free passage through Highway 95, alongside unaffiliated caravans, resulting in the cut-off contingents getting resupplied once again. The CDF eventually attempted to regain its lost territory through diplomatic negotiations with the SLF splinter cell residing in Bullhead City, much to the dismay of the CDF veterans who despise them. The proposal was welcomed by the SLF residing in Bullhead City, with the CDF slated to regain control of Fort Mojave and other smaller sections of the city in a deal put forth by a distinguished CDF official residing in Arizona. These negotiations were cut short, however, 2096, when the official behind the proposal turned up dead in his home in Phoenix, executed in cold blood by the unknown, much like what was happening in the East.
Towards the end of the war, life in Lake Mead had been forever changed. With the USPF and CDF out of the picture, and the SLF all but abandoned the region, Wastelanders were left to their own devices. It was not long before most came to realize just how paramount factions were for the safety of the valley. The valley's two scrap towns were widely referred to as plague towns by locals, despite there being no mutants. Crooks and criminals used the towns as racketeering grounds, only looking to turn a profit. With organized patrols completely ceasing in the region, the town of Boulder Cove became infested with opportune bandits robbing easy marks. Caravanners were often the target of various bandit ambushes. Pockets of mutants started reappearing in Lake Mead after they'd been officially wiped out by the likes of the USPF, SLF, and Wastelanders, tormenting the local populations for years, while getting stronger. After the USPF abandoned Lake Mead, the SLF were quick to run through the base and pick it clean, before opening it to the general public. Wastelanders flocked to the bunker in hope of finding shelter. Over the next few years, the bunker was used on and off by various passing caravans. Most figured out it was a better idea to stay away, as bandits often waited for unlucky Wastelanders inside the bunker. Through the Reconstruction era, the valley had long been abandoned. For the most part, Lake Mead was inhabited by caravans, using it as a pit stop, or scavengers digging up old history from the desert sands. Cliff Guard and Crater View were used nothing more than landmarks by this point, as the desert winds had taken apart the scrap structures that once made up buildings constructed by their architects. With the valley now all but abandoned, rumors had spread to surrounding territories of ghosts haunting the valley, attesting to the countless blood spilled during the 3-year ground war that had plagued the region. Historians since then found credible evidence of the existence of a mysterious group that operated in the American Southwest throughout the Dust Bowl era, known colloquially as the Raptors. While not much is known about the group, historians have pieced together that they were a former USPF Special Operations Unit that deserted with various equipment during the 17th insurrection. Since then, it's been hypothesized and rumored that the Raptors were behind the SLF nuclear payload heist in Lake Mead, setting forth a chain of events that resulted in the nuking of Nellis. Over the decades, rumors of a second nuclear detonation in the Pacific spread like wildfire, with dozens of Wastelanders claiming to have seen a mushroom cloud over the calm waters of the West Coast. Till this day, the motives and whereabouts of the Raptors remain another unsolved mystery in the wasteland.
Despite their shortcomings, the SLF had at long last achieved their goal of creating an enclave free of all government entities. The dream of a free market had been realized, at least for a short while. The SLF's vision of an untamed wasteland was incompatible with the vision of tomorrow. Large settlements in the southwest were light years behind the development of the cities in the east. When satellite communication was established in 2067, many began to travel eastward in search of better living conditions for them and their families. Few stayed behind in the scrap towns of the west. Lives from every corner of the wasteland were forever changed after the ground war had come to an end in the valley. Many felt that the war was pointless, and soon blamed the SLF for their own shortcomings. By 2096, the East was embroiled in conflict. As the CDF seceded from the USA, the West remained untamed and in a state of disarray. Heavy fighting over trivial matters and territorial disputes continued. Through the rise and fall of the PRT, the reunification of the USA in the East, the West stayed the same as it always had, a hotbed for lawlessness, undesirables, and paramilitaries who lay claim to Western lands. By this time, the SLF and its exploits were all but a distant memory for the old souls who had lived through their rule in the far corners of the American Southwest. For many, it is simply another ended chapter for the world after the Flash.